The Prime Minister did recommend wearing them in crowded and enclosed spaces. In addition, the working from home guidance will no longer apply, and the legal requirement to self-isolate will go when the regulations expire on the 24th of March. Well, the Prime Minister told the Commons today he will not resign over the Downing Street party allegations as he faces the threat of a growing number of letters of no confidence from MPs within his own party. If 54 Conservative MPs submit letters of no confidence, that would trigger a leadership contest for the party. Well, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, questioned the Prime Minister's lack of action throughout the pandemic. However, Boris Johnson believes his government achieved more during the pandemic than any European country.
While Labour was setting out plans to heat homes, he was buying a fridge to keep the party wine chilled. While we were setting out plans to keep bills down, he was planning parties. And while we were setting out plans to save jobs in the steel industry, he was trying to save just one job, his own.
When the history of this pandemic comes to be written, and the history of the Labour Party comes to be written, and believe me, they are history and will remain history, Mr. Speaker, it will show that we delivered while they dithered, and we vaccinated while they vacillated, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister has said the Conservatives will win again in Bury South after the MP, Christian Wakefield, defected from the Conservative Party to Labour. Well, the MP said the Prime Minister and the Conservatives have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves. Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, has welcomed the defection. Mr Wakefield was cheered by Labour MPs as he took his seat on the opposition benches during Prime Minister's questions. The cost of living has risen at the fastest pace in 30 years as inflation rose to 5.4% in December. That's up now from 5.1% in November. The price of food, non-alcoholic drinks, hospitality and clothing went up in the last month. That rise was partially offset by declining prices of transport and recreation. A second man has now been arrested in Ireland in connection to the murder of Aisling Murphy. Irish police say he's been detained for questioning in relation to potential withholding of information. The man who was arrested yesterday on suspicion of murder of Aisling Murphy remains in custody. The schoolteacher was attacked whilst on a run near a canal in Tullamore, County Offaly, last Wednesday. Now, a former British ambassador to Russia says he's concerned British troops training Ukrainians won't be able to get out of the country in time if a Russian invasion occurs. The UK's Armed Forces Minister has reiterated British forces will not participate in active military action between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has sent troops to Belarus and amassed 100,000 troops with tanks on its own soil near the Ukrainian border. Well, Sir Tony Brenton, the former ambassador, told GBNews the UK infantry training team of around 100 personnel sent to Ukraine will be the only Western troops there at this time. UK crime-fighting groups have travelled to the Spanish capital of Madrid to track down the 12 most wanted fugitives. The National Crime Agency and crime-fighting charity Crime Stoppers are launching a multinational campaign to find the offenders, all of whom have connections with Spain or the Canary Islands. Well, the dozen on the run, all men, are wanted for crimes including murder, drugs and weapons trafficking. Well, we can find out more and go live to Madrid because our home and security editor, Mark White, is there for us. Mark, just explain to us, what is the latest?
Well, this is a major campaign right across Spain and, of course, in the UK, where these 12 most wanted fugitives are a mix of murder suspects, drug traffickers and gun runners. The National Crime Agency say that by now it's likely that those fugitives will have tried to integrate into the British expat communities across Spain. And so people here have been asked to go to the likes of the GBNews website to look at the images, see if they recognise anyone, because it's likely that they may well be key to identifying the criminals among them.
Mark, thank you. Speaking to us live there from Madrid. Now, Yorkshire County Cricket Club have appointed Otis Gibson as their new head coach on a 3-year deal. The 52-year-old is the latest addition to the coaching team at Headingley following the departures of 16 staff members last month. It comes after the allegations of racial abuse and bullying raised by the former player Azim Rafiq. You are up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, DAB Plus radio and online. I'll keep you up to date across the afternoon. Now, back to On the Money.
And this is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Just before we start our show, let's take a moment to react to that quite astonishing Prime Minister's questions, during which Boris Johnson faced calls for his resignation following Partygate, and he also had to deal with the defection of a Tory MP, Christian Wakefield, who crossed the floor to Labour. And as we just heard, the Prime Minister also announced COVID Plan B restrictions will end. It's all happening. And GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey can tell us more. Darren.
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Liam. Quite an extraordinary Prime Minister's questions in many regards. I think let's start with the overall narrative. I have to say, I thought the Prime Minister's question time today for Boris Johnson was a hell of a lot better than it was last week. Now, that is a pretty low bar, given that for Boris Johnson, Prime Minister's question time was not his finest last week. I thought the strategy, and it was clearly a very deliberate strategy, of not to apologise anymore, but rather to go on the attack and to talk up the successes of the government, did somewhat rally the Conservative benches. It certainly seemed to play pretty well in the chamber. Keir Starmer, I didn't think quite scored a goal, or the goals that he has done in the past, though he did make quite a few jokes that seem to have gone down pretty well with his backbenchers. But there are two notable things that changed that narrative somewhat. First of all, as you say, was the defection of a Conservative MP to the Labour Party. He literally crossed the floor of the House just before PMQs started. What timing? That is Christian Wakefield, who's the Bury South MP. Now, he's got a majority that runs into the hundreds. Clearly concerns about the diving popularity of Boris Johnson, particularly in those red wall seats. But in saying that, probably the most remarkable moment, Liam, was that speech from David Davis, a man who's, of course, run to be a Conservative leader, long-standing, well-respected senior Conservative MP, who stood up towards the end, quoting Neville Chamberlain and essentially saying to the Prime Minister that now is the time to go. Very significant moment, one that, as I say, changed the entire tone of Prime Minister's question time, one that will play on Conservative MPs' minds as we hear that more than this morning have put in letters. One thing I would say, or two things I should say, first of all, that might mitigate, give the Prime Minister a bit more time. Clearly the party is very pleased with that announcement, as you say, within the last 30 minutes or so. The Plan B restrictions are going to be dropped, most notably that mask wearing is also going to stop being legally enforceable in confined spaces. But second of all, I think in some ways, somewhat bizarrely in how Westminster works, so that defection by Christian Wakefield to the Labour Party might play in Boris's favour. It makes this a kind of tribal issue to a degree. Many within the party feel he may have betrayed not just the Prime Minister but the Conservative Party itself, and that might make some of the possible rebels, or the people who want to see Boris go, pause for thought. And I'll end on this, Liam. Significantly also, we heard from the Prime Minister, I think he may have slipped it out by mistake, that we're not now expecting that report from Sue Gray until next week. And while the atmosphere here, as you say, is pretty free-ball, very excitable at moments, I still think the majority of Conservative MPs are willing to wait for that report before they decide whether to back the Prime Minister or not.
I agree with you, Darren. David Davis, former leadership contender, quoting Leo Amery as he chided Neville Chamberlain when Britain was facing war. An incredible moment, I think, in our Parliament today. But all the political pundits are saying they know how many letters Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, has got. If 54 Tory MPs submit their letters, then Boris Johnson faces a leadership and a no contest vote. What's your best guess, Darren? How near are we that 54 Tory MP letter threshold?
You know what? I mean, frankly, I've no idea, and I think anyone who claims they do is slightly fibbing. You know, there are reports. Yesterday it was around 20 or 30. We know that some of the 2019ers, those people elected a couple of years ago, or in that election, did submit some letters this morning, so that will have nudged it up further. But frankly, we don't know. There could be people very easily defending the Prime Minister in public who've put a letter into Sir Graham Brady. There might be others that have been pretty quiet who may have done the same. You can also withdraw letters if you want. It's a very difficult process to judge. It's one of the reasons that it is secret, and it's one of the reasons that Sir Graham Brady, in many regards, holds all the cards on this. But yeah, many will reflect on what David Davis had to say, and I'll try. I was trying to find the quote to read it back to you. He said, "I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, you did the opposite of that." And then he says, "In the name of God, go." Pretty powerful moment. Certainly will be one of the standout moments of what has been a quite extraordinary couple of weeks. In saying that, it's too easy sometimes in the moment to get carried away with this suggestion that the Prime Minister is on the precipice. There is no doubt he is fighting for his political career. But at the same time, Liam, it's not that easy to get rid of a Prime Minister. And even if the rebels do manage to get to that 54 number to call for a vote, we have to remember John Major survived a vote of no confidence in the 90s. Theresa May survived a vote of no confidence only a matter of years ago. Trying to hold an election on the future of the leadership of the Conservative Party is pretty difficult. Trying to defeat the incumbent Prime Minister, even more difficult, I would suggest.
Darren, as ever, very sharp analysis. You could even say it's on the money. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor. And coming up on the money today, inflation hit 5.4% in December, with upward price pressures at their most serious since 1992 across the UK as food, fuel and transport costs spiral. The cost of living squeeze is now being felt by millions. We host a detailed discussion of what's happening and why, explaining to you, GB News viewers and GB News radio listeners, of course, what's really going on. Plus, today's Money Talks interview, I'm speaking with the CEO of the Centre for Social Justice. That's a social policy think tank working with poverty-fighting charities across Britain to bring about change.
The SJ Foundation will go out there and find out all the men and women across this country who are changing lives day in, day out, but very rarely get any of the attention that they need or the attention they deserve.
Andy Cook of the Centre for Social Justice, that's later in the show. As ever, your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet @gbnews. Stay with us. It's a big news day. It's GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money. Well, don't say we didn't warn you. When On the Money launched in September, our very first edition stated inflation is back and there's lots more to come. Now it has come to pass. It brings me no pleasure to report the Consumer Price Index in December was 5.4% up on the same month in 2020, with inflation now at a 30-year high. Average wages, meanwhile, grew just 3.8% at the back end of last year, with pay going up slower than prices. So our spending power is falling. This cost of living squeeze, which On the Money's warned about for months, is now most definitely upon us. And dig into the data, in fact, and inflation is even higher than the headline numbers. The Consumer Price Index, that's at 5.4%. That's the headline number. But the Retail Price Index, which includes housing costs, that's 7.4% higher than in December 2020. And what's called the PPI, that's the Producer Price Index, that's the cost of inputs for firms, that's at 13.5%, well into double digits. Now, for my money, the RPI, that's by far the more relevant number. When phone companies raise contract prices, train companies increase fares. When local councils set rent paid by low-income council house tenants, they tend to link those increases to the RPI. And RPI, as we just saw, is already at 7.4%, even higher than the headline CPI measure. And on top of that, PPI inflation, the cost of inputs used by firms, wholesale inflation, if you like, is already deep into double-digit territory. So headline inflation is the highest in 3 decades, but on-the-ground inflation, in my view, is even higher. All these numbers are actually backward-looking, referring to December price pressures. In the weeks and months ahead, higher costs for firms will push up prices in shops further. Plus, rising household fuel bills are set to get even higher when the new energy price cap kicks in April. I'm an optimist. On the Money celebrates all that is good about British business. But these inflation numbers are worrying and set to go higher still. Politics is febrile, as we've said, with the media focused on whether or not Boris Johnson can cling on. But what really matters, to my mind, is the living standards of millions of people up and down this great country. And that's why we're posing this On the Money question today. The cost of living crisis. How much worse can it get? On the Money, grown-up discussions with people who really know their stuff, and what a panel I've got for you today. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Gerard Lyons, former Chief Economic Advisor to Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor. Now he's Chief Economic Strategist at Netwealth. John Longworth, another friend of the show. He's the chair of the Independent Business Network. He used to run the British Chamber of Commerce. And there he is at the end of the desk, lurking. It's our answer to Gordon Gekko. It's Justin Urquhart Stewart, of course. And down the line, delighted to have with us again, Miatta Fahnbulleh. Happy New Year, Miatta. You're the Chief Executive at the New Economics Foundation, and you are always welcome. Jerry, let's start with you, if we may. A lot of people think that you should have been the Governor of the Bank of England. I won't embarrass you. You were a candidate, a high-profile candidate, and lots of people thought your candidacy was unfairly dismissed. How do you think Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England Governor's doing now that the RPI is at 7.4% and the CPI is at 5.4%?
Well, great to be on the show, Liam. Thanks for your comments. I don't want to get into personalities. Yeah. I'd sooner focus on the policies. But the Bank of England has been asleep at the wheel for some time. It's not just in terms of not nipping inflation in the bud. It's also not being able to control that increase in inflation expectations. But on top of that, not really talked about, and you mentioned lots of indicators of inflation, but the bank's policy has contributed to rampant asset price inflation, property prices in particular. I would argue monetary policy in this country has done more to increase inequality than anything else measured by...
That's quantitative easing, as we say.
Printing of money, quantitative easing. Last year, not only did the Bank of England keep interest rates at rock-bottom levels when the economy was recovering, but bizarrely, they continued to print money. And not only have they contributed, in my mind, to the inflation problem we currently have, they've also contributed to financial instability in the sense that financial markets are no longer pricing properly for risk. So we have the inflation problem, the failure to nip it in the bud. We have the asset price problem contributing to rampant house price inflation. Obviously, they're not the only contributor, but they haven't really helped, and that's added to inequality. And they've also contributed, in my mind, to financial instability. Now, clearly, they need to get ahead of the game. That implies monetary policy will tighten. But coming back...
Interest rates go up.
Interest rates will go up. That will not prevent inflationary pressures building in the next few months. There will be a significant cost of living squeeze, not only because of inflation, but higher energy prices and the increases in taxes that, in my mind, were not justified at the time. So all of these factors... Some of them are naturally within the remit of the Bank of England. Some of them are outside. But it's a very difficult environment. But despite all that, I think, just to pass it on to you, I think you're right to be optimistic about the economy.
Yes.
The jobs market is very good.
Yes.
The employment picture is
important, we stress that.
But we are going to see a significant squeeze in the cost of living, and that's going to hit people on low incomes, pensioners, those people who are not able to have big wage increases, and also RPI going up across the board, many built-in costs, including the interest rate on student loans.
That's right.
So lots of built-in pressures here.
John, Justin, hold your fire for a minute, because I do want to go to Miatta Fahnbulleh, who is of the New Economics Foundation. Miatta, I know you can only stay with us for the first chunk of this show, so I really want to get your input at the top. There is a cost of living squeeze. The New Economics Foundation is obviously very focused on that. You're more of a centre-left think tank. Just outline your concerns about how high inflation can impact on living standards, particularly at the sharp end.
I do need to respond to John's point, because I think there is one area where I fundamentally disagree with him, which is the capacity of the Bank of England to respond. Now, the Bank of England responds to tackle inflation where it's been driven by the demand, right? Where the economy is overheating, where we're seeing lots of activity, lots of investment. And that is not the case with the UK economy. And so their calculation was you increase interest rates, you nip whatever recovery we have in the bud, and you don't deal with inflation because it's been driven by supply side constraints, not demand and overheating. So I think I take a different analysis of what's happening. In terms of cost of living, there is no doubt about this. This is going to be really painful for people. You know, we haven't seen this level of kind of price rise for a long time. And why it matters is that it comes off the back of the pandemic period, where we know half of households lost about £110 in income, they were squeezed, and it comes off the back a decade in which living standards haven't moved. Families have very little cushion to weather this storm, and I fear it's going to get worse before it gets better. The numbers we're talking about are last year. We're expecting energy price rises, we're expecting to see food prices rising, we're expecting to see the essentials rise. And for me, there has to be government action. The government's got to step in. It's got to step in to help protect incomes, because, by the way, it's made the situation worse with that cut to universal credit and the national insurance increase that's going to hit modest income families the hardest. And it's got to act to deal with the particular challenge around energy price rises.
Miata, thank you for that. It's great to have you on the show. You're always welcome. Briefly, we are going to carry on this discussion after the break. It's a massively important discussion. John, briefly from you, as a former boss of the British Chamber of Commerce, that PPI number I highlighted, 13.4%, firms' input costs. Eventually, those costs must be passed on or the firms go bust.
Indeed. But of course, there is massive confidence amongst CEOs. Surveys have shown that the economy is doing very well. But the government needs to allow the economy to let rip. More difficult when you've got an inflationary situation, of course. But we really need to use those post-Brexit opportunities to let the economy go. It's not government that should be doing things. This has been one of the problems with the Boris Johnson government so far. They've got to free up the private sector to actually deliver, which means get out of the way, cut taxes, deregulate, boost the domestic economy. That's the way to deal with the economic situation and the squeeze and wages. At the same time, of course, we have got a problem. QE went on for way too long. I was saying it 4 years ago when I was with the British Chamber of Commerce. And actually, that's been one of the biggest pressures on inflation.
Just for the break, let's briefly bring in Justin. Are you surprised 5.4% CPI inflation?
I'm surprised he's not governor of the Bank of England. That's something done.
He's finished now. He's been on my show.
An economist that talks proper sense with these things that we can all understand. No, I'm not surprised by 5.4%. All those other worrying figures that are higher as well. But absolutely right, in terms of government action, that does not mean more money in here. That means actually changing the structure for taxation and incentives for more investment. We can do that.
We'll come back to you after the break. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. In just a moment, we'll be looking at the impact of inflation on the high street and small businesses. Carrying on this discussion, stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again. Bright, sunny skies are arriving across the UK once early cloud has cleared, but they are accompanied by a cold wind coming all the way from the Arctic and carrying some wintry showers, but only in a few places. For many, once this cold front is through, high pressure is building back in, so it's staying relatively settled. However, you can see the tight isobars there, especially across northern and eastern parts of the UK. A cold wind returns directly from the north, and that wind will blow some wintry showers, a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow for parts of northern Scotland. Meanwhile, cloud and outbreaks of generally showery rain clearing the south by early afternoon, and then those brighter skies for all of us. 10, 11 Celsius in the south, 6 or 7 further north, but feeling cold when you take into account that strong wind coming from the north. It will continue to blow clear skies our way across much of the country through Wednesday night into the early hours of Thursday. A few showers coming down the North Sea into northern Scotland as well as eastern England. Again, a mixture of rain, sleet and snow. But where we get some clear spells away from those showers, temperatures fairly widely below freezing. So a frosty, cold start to Thursday. Plenty of bright, sunny weather first thing. Not much fog around compared to recent mornings. but it is going to be a cold day, particularly in the north and the east when you take into account that wind, gales around the far north at first. And that wind will also blow in further snow showers for the far north of Scotland and perhaps the odd snow flurry for eastern counties. Otherwise, plenty of sunny weather. And under those clear skies again on Thursday night, widely a frost will form. In fact, it could be a very cold night indeed across some southern and southwestern parts of the UK, perhaps in some spots the coldest night of the winter so far. But cloudier skies return from the west on Friday, and that cloud will keep frost a bit more limited through the weekend.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back, GB News viewers and, of course, listeners on DAB Radio. You are on the money, and today, amidst our febrile political environment, we're focusing on inflation, which hit 5.4% in December. That's a 30-year high. Millions are facing spiralling food, fuel and transport costs as the cost of living squeeze tightens. I'm still with my expert panel in the studio. And we're also joined, I'm happy to say, by Mike Whedon, Chair of the Federation of Small Businesses Retail and High Street Policy Unit. Welcome, Michael. Great to see you as ever. One reason I focused on the producer price index, which is up above 13%, is because, of course, many of the firms that you represent, the small and medium-sized firms who drive the British economy, will be facing those higher price pressures. In the end, they're going to have to pass those price pressures on, aren't they? They're going to be felt in the shops if they're going to survive.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we've seen earlier that input costs for business are rising faster than prices to consumers. And that's made worse by, I've got to say, an increase in late payment by customers. Cost of living is rising faster than pay. So you can expect that that will have to feed through at some point. And we're also in a rising interest rate environment. Welcome to some of your panelists, certainly. So the cost of money is going up. Difficult to find something which isn't. Now, all of those suggest, as does the Bank of England itself, more inflation yet to come, although we don't know when it'll end. The Bank of England always says it'll end in 2 years' time at 2%. One of the questions earlier was about the government putting more money in. Actually, we think at the moment, facing April's increases in national insurance in particular, one thing the government could do here is take less out by not putting up national insurance for businesses, employees, and the self-employed in April, and looking at the employment allowance as well. We can already see that insolvencies are rising. the number of small businesses fell by 400,000 last year.
Wow.
And our research shows that could happen again in 2022. So, yeah, I mean, this will always feed through. Ultimately, it all comes down to the numbers, doesn't it?
We're seeing some pictures of the high street as you're speaking, Michael. We can all understand what higher inflation does to shoppers, ordinary households, what it does to the cost of living. What's it like running a small and medium-sized enterprise when inflation is high? How does that impact the decisions of people that own those businesses to invest, to expand, to employ people, to drive the economy?
Well, it adds to uncertainty. You know, you always run a business looking forward to the future. You're planning for next week, next month, over the next year. You have to plan your employment levels, and you've got to try and work out what is going to be happening with spending as far as your customers are concerned. So it's increasing uncertainty at the moment, and we've already seen a fall away in the number of businesses, which is something we can ill afford. As at some point, and it will happen eventually, we come out of this pandemic, we will need businesses to really thrive, to help the economy recover. They need to be looking forward now. So they need to be as clear as possible about what, for example, their cost base is going to be. And we really think that, you know, simple things like concentrating on the employment market and that national insurance issue really is something that could give them some confidence now. We measure confidence on a quarterly basis, and it fell among small businesses every quarter last year, all 4 quarters. We don't know where we're going to be in the first quarter of this year, but I would hazard a guess, although predicting anything these days is a pretty risky thing to do, is that by the time we come to April, when those national insurance increases kick in, we may well see a 5th quarter in a row.
Mike Weedon, the Federation of Small Businesses, thank you very much. We must move on. Jerry, before we move on, very, very briefly, we've got to go to some news. Mike Weedon there mentioned those national insurance rises coming in April. Could they be reversed? A lot of pressure coming on the government. Could measures announced in a budget then be reversed before they're introduced?
They could be reversed. Remember that they were increased because the Treasury was too pessimistic about the economy, thought borrowing would be higher. The economy has proved stronger. Borrowing, while high, is not as high as the Treasury thought. So in theory, if they wanted to, politically, they could decide to reverse them.
Amazing. Hold that thought. We'll be carrying on this discussion. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up also, as well as more grown-up discussion with people who know their stuff, we'll be talking on our Money Talks interview to Andy Cook of the Centre for Social Justice. Stay with us, because first it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright here to get you up to date on GB News. England's coronavirus Plan B restrictions will be lifted next week. The Prime Minister announced that face masks in public places will no longer be mandatory. However, he recommended wearing them in crowded and enclosed places. In addition, the guidance to work from home will no longer apply, nor will the use of COVID passes be mandated. Separately, there will be no legal requirement to self-isolate if you have a positive COVID infection from the 24th of March. The MP, Christian Wakefield, has defected from the Conservative Party to Labour, saying Boris Johnson and the Conservatives have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves. Well, the Prime Minister has said the Conservatives will win again in his seat. The leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has welcomed the defection. Well, Boris Johnson also told the Commons today he won't resign over the Downing Street party allegations as he faces the threat of a growing number of letters of no confidence from within his own party. If 54 Tories submit letters of no confidence, that would trigger a leadership contest for the party. In other news now, the cost of living has risen at the fastest pace in 30 years as inflation rose to 5.4% in December. That's up from 5.1% in November. The price of food, non-alcoholic drinks and hospitality and clothing went up in the last month. UK crime-fighting groups have travelled to the Spanish capital, Madrid, to track down the 12 most wanted fugitives. The National Crime Agency and crime-fighting charity Crime Stoppers are launching a multinational campaign to find the offenders, all of whom have connections with Spain or the Canary Islands. Well, the dozen on the run, all men, are wanted for crimes including murder, drugs and weapons trafficking. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. I'll keep you up to date across the afternoon. After a short break, we'll be back to On the Money.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:37 and you're on the money. Today, we're talking about the cost of living crisis as inflation hits a 30-year high. I'm still with my expert panel in the studio. Let's go to you, Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Let's look forward. We posed the question, the cost of living, how much worse will it get? We're at 5.4% CPI inflation now, a 30-year high. Where's it going in the weeks and months to come?
The pressure is still there, isn't it? Now, the good news is some will drop off as you reach the 12-month element, but how much of it is actually embedded? That's the bit we don't know yet. Probably a little bit more than we think. So businesses should be expecting this to still be here for some time. Maybe not the peak levels, but it ain't going away now. But all the more reason, therefore, just as we're hearing that vital word confidence, so that businesses know that they've got the confidence that they can invest, also confidence that consumers go out and buy stuff. If you don't have the confidence, the economy starts slowing up, velocity of money through the economy, all those old phrases. It's important. Now's the time for that.
It certainly is. John Longworth, former boss of the British Chamber of Commerce, we know the global economy. It's a global thing. It's spluttering to get back into gear. We know about these supply chain issues, the huge costs of shipping, labour shortages, skill shortages, all these things. Inflation's going to get worse, isn't it, before it gets better?
Yeah, our economic advisors think about 6.5%, 7%.
That's CPI. So the retail price index will be even higher.
Even higher. Businesses in our network say it could go as high as 10.
Wow.
So, they're quite pessimistic from that point of view. I mean, let's look what's happening.
Goes back to the 70s. We've been watching the two Ronnies on the telly.
Nearly, yes.
Well, we are anyway.
If you look at what's coming, the government's decided to go on the road to net zero in the most expensive way they could possibly do.
And that's driving inflation.
And that's going to drive inflation.
Because it's pushing up fuel bills.
So that's coming down the line. The Treasury is saying they might not be able to recover 4/5 of the money they gave out in bounce back loans, which means they've loads of money sloshing around in the economy that they can't get back. All that monetary economic pressure is driving inflation as much as anything else. And of course, the Bank of England putting up interest rates, initially interest rates, well, they're a good signal for calming the economy down. Initially, they will add to the cost of living. And actually, we don't need to calm the economy down. What we really need is to boost the economy, but actually take money out of the system at the same time. Very difficult to do.
The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, Jerry, meets in early February. Is an interest rate rise still very low rates? We went up to 0.25%, didn't we, just before Christmas? Yeah. Are they nailed on now, a higher interest rate?
Well, the bank, as we know from recent months, has not been very good at guiding expectations, so it's wrong to say anything with certainty. But interest rates now are below their pre-pandemic level, so they're at an emergency level, even now the economy is back to where it was at the time the pandemic started. Of course, its trend rate of growth needs to pick up a bit more. So that would suggest that the bank does need to move away from emergency levels of interest rates. That means getting rates back up to 0.75%. They're currently at 0.25%. So I would suggest that they start to increase further as soon as they can. Of course, they've stopped quantitative easing. We now need to see quantitative tightening, QT.
So a lot of that printed money taking it out of the economy.
Now, it's important to address this issue that because the initial shock was a supply-side shock, higher energy prices, there's this argument that you heard earlier that banks shouldn't do anything. It was a similar point made a few years ago. Mark Carney, then the governor, said that the Bank of England doesn't build houses. Of course it doesn't. Therefore, he suggested that they didn't need to worry about house price inflation. But implicitly, their actions, even before the pandemic, of cheap money contributed to cheap finance, feeding house price inflation. The bank obviously can't do anything to control energy prices, but what they have to do, and what they should do, is try and limit the pass-through effect, both by actions that directly curb the second-round effects, and indirectly, very importantly, by managing inflation expectations. Once the inflation genie is out of the bottle, then both consumers, wage earners, and producers, retailers, all start to increase their prices, and that seeps into the system. So by not nipping it in the bud, you then run the risk, and it's the big word, the risk, of inflation being much higher, and John touched on it possibly being significantly higher.
As they say on Wall Street, once you get that inflationary toothpaste, it can't get it back in the tube. Justin, we've just had an email from one of our viewers. What happens if interest rates don't rise in February?
Well, apart from, again, being misled as to what's supposed to be happening, Bank of England have been nothing if not consistent in being wrong. So really not helping us very much here. No, the interest rates, if they go up a little bit, it's not going to make that much difference overall. Also, the consumer rates have already gone up. Look at the mortgage rates. They've already gone higher anyway. No, we really want to get those rates up to a level where when things start slowing down again, you can cut them again. When you're at naught, it's quite difficult.
It is. You got no ammunition left in the locker.
And, you know,
nothing in the tank.
The economy is actually doing quite well. Now is the time to take advantage of that.
Well, it's been a fabulous discussion. Thank you to Miata Fambulla of the New Economics Foundation, who joined us earlier, Michael Whedon of the Federation of Small Businesses, and, of course, in the studio, Gerard Lyons, Chief Economist of Net Wealth, John Longworth, formerly of the British Chamber of Commerce, and Justin Urquhart-Stewart. As I said here, on the money, grown-up discussions with people who really know their stuff. Now, as the cost of living surges, we're all looking at smart ways to save our pennies, including keeping grocery bills down. Well, the consumer group, which, highly respected, has found that it's Aldi that's officially the cheapest supermarket chain out there. That's according to their annual survey, and Aldi grabbed that title off its discount rival Lidl, which won in 2020. Here to tell us more, it's GB News London reporter Paul Hawkins. Paul, great to see you here on The Money. Tell us a bit more about this survey.
Yeah, so this survey, Liam, good afternoon to you, by the consumer group, which there's two parts to the survey, effectively. They looked, there's the first part, they looked at hundreds of thousands of products, and they came to the conclusion, having looked at all those products, that grocery prices in the UK, on average, 9% higher this year compared to last year. Aldi were the cheapest supermarket for 6 of the past 12 months, Lidl for 5 of the past 12 months. Another survey they did on 19 basic grocery items, the average price rise on those up 3.4% in a year. Waitrose, the most expensive, probably sounds surprisingly, 9.2%, although they would say they're giving great value for money. Sainsbury's only up by 0.6% on those 19 basic items over the past 12 years, which you would probably expect. You may have seen, if you shop in Sainsbury's, you see that price match with Aldi that they do. So very much trying to fight for market share, Sainsbury's, one of the big four, with the likes of Aldi and Lidl, who really have transformed the supermarket sector over the past sort of 10, 15 years.
That as this cost of living squeeze tightens, we get some good old-fashioned competition among our supermarkets. It strikes me there are many areas of the British economy which there isn't lots of competition, but I certainly think there is when it comes to groceries and supermarkets in general.
Massive.
Oh, we've lost Paul Hawkins. He's back.
I'm back. Around about 2008, Lidl and Aldi arrived on the supermarket scene, and they really started a price war amongst the supermarkets. Possibly the only time that war is good, a supermarket price war. And now, around about 11% of the average household budget is spent on food and drink. Compare that to the 1970s, when it was 25%. For the last sort of 3-4 years, we've never had it so good when it comes to the variety of food and drink we can get in the shops and the prices at which we can get them. That said, how it's going to pan out over the next 12 months, most analysts saying that the price of food and drink in the supermarkets is going to go up, even for the likes of Lidl and Aldi. Their price margins are around about 2%. It's 3% for the big four. That's Asda, Morrison's, Sainsbury's and Tesco's. So they've got a little bit of room for wriggle there, the big four. But the other two, Lidl and Aldi, are operating on margins of 2%. They've got a little less room for error, but they're going to be some fierce price wars, but all prices are going to go. The question is, who's going to go first? Who's going to start raising their prices first? Because of course, labour costs, energy costs, rising taxes, wholesale price of food and drink having a real impact on supermarkets, and many analysts saying that even though Lidl and Aldi, they're still going to be at sort of the bottom end of the range when it comes to prices. Generally speaking, the cost of food and drink is going to rise over the next 12 months. One would have to say for Lidl and Aldi, there's an opportunity there for them to steal market share, though.
Beautifully described, Paul. You're giving me a run for my money when it comes to economics. Paul Hawkins there, our GB News national reporter on that supermarket price war, perhaps. Now, time for my daily interview series, It's Money Talks. And today, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Andy Cook. Andy runs the Centre of Social Justice. That's a think tank otherwise known as the CSJ. With inflation rising and everyday essentials, including food, beverages, food and energy going up, who's protecting those most effective? Well, the CSJ aims to put social justice at the heart of British politics, working with some of our most vulnerable communities, collaborating with over 400 grassroots charities to develop and lobby for reforms designed to help the disadvantaged. And under Andy Cook, the CSJ has been tackling some really tough issues: welfare reform, modern slavery, drug and alcohol addiction, and, of course, consumer debts. So here he is, today's Money Talks, the CEO of the Centre for Social Justice. It's Andy Cook. Andy, great to see you here in the On the Money studio. We've worked with CSJ a fair bit over recent months, highlighting some of your reports, talking to many of your staff. Just for listeners and viewers who don't really know what a think tank is, what is a think tank?
Well, I'm trying to work it out myself, to be honest.
Good man.
What we do is we go out. I think we're quite unique. Obviously, I'm massively biased about what we do, but we're unique. We go out across the country, we listen and learn to those most struggling, and we try and get all those voices, get that understanding, and analyse it in terms of what policy is doing to make their lives better or make it harder, to release them into the potential that they've got. We're focused on the bottom 20%, those most struggling, and so we try and build package of reform, big policy ideas to directly change their lives.
So you're a charity, you're funded by donations. I know you've got a few dozen staff. Now, the CSJ, it was originally founded by Ian Duncan Smith, who used to be, of course, the leader of the Conservative Party. But I think it's fair to say you're very much a cross-party think tank. You have big contacts in Parliament from all the parties. You try and work with governments of all stripes.
100%, yeah. We'll work with anyone who will listen. That's why we're delighted to be constantly with you, Liam, because actually the stuff that really affects those most struggling is not talked about in the mainstream in how it should be. And so, yeah, we work with anyone and everyone. We've got great friends in the Labour Party, great friends in the Tories. You know, for my own sake, I had to be cross-party because my mates and my mother in Leeds, if I turned into some Tory, I'd really know about it.
You certainly would. You couldn't show your face back in the hometown.
No, big trouble.
So, Andy, I think what's interesting for me about the Centre for Social Justice is You know, there are lots of think tanks out there, but what you guys really try and do, and I know you do this, is you collaborate with those grassroots charities, those on-the-ground, not just campaigning groups, but groups providing practical assistance, be it people running food banks, be it people providing addiction for debt, drug, alcohol addiction, and so on. So how do you link up what those charities on the ground are telling you with, if you like, high politics and stuff that you try and put in a minister's ear over lunch?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're our eyes and ears. There's no doubt about it. We go out there. We've got regional offices now that we're opening across the country. We've got one in the Midlands, one in the North West, one in the North East. The grand aim is to get one in Yorkshire, of course, although there's no social...
Centre of England.
Well, quite right. So our team spend time listening, learning, engaging with them. What are the real issues? What are the root cause issues here? Westminster likes to just pour money at an issue, often through DWP, and saying this will solve
the Department for Work and Pensions,
yeah,
through the usual channels.
The usual channels.
Rather than using the charitable sector, which can often do really good on-the-ground work.
And these men and women across the country are absolute heroes. They're seldom heard about. I'm not talking about the big boys here, the big, massive charities that dominate everything.
Yeah.
The small guys who've got their head down, changing lives, and are ambitious for lives. They want to see lives become independent, not dependent on all the things going on, because they're ambitious for them. They know their potential to be developed and not problems to be solved.
Now, lockdown's been really hard for everybody. There's a sense we're coming through this pandemic now, but a lot of lives have been deeply affected, in some cases shattered. To what extent has the lockdown experience made the work that CSJ is doing, your on-the-ground charities, more important?
Yeah, lockdown has been an absolute shocker. We have not, other than you and brilliant podcasts and all the things that you've been doing on this, no one knows the true cost that has affected the poorest. Whilst Middle England, on the whole, have done all right, assets have improved.
Yeah. The laptop classes.
Well, exactly.
Sitting at home in their spare rooms. Oh, I don't have to spend money on the train.
Costs have gone down. If you are in the poorest areas, you have been really badly affected by this, like properly affected.
You can't work in a factory from home, can you? You can't deliver parcels to people's houses from home.
You can't. And if you're on free school meals, suddenly you're paying for your meals, whereas school was sorted out. There's costs like this that no one talks about what we did. Imagine being in a high-rise through this last time, on your own, with 3 kids, with no technology and all.
Someone hassling you if you take your kids to the park.
100%. And so it's been a real shocker. And actually, the people who've been solving this have been the small charities out on the front line. They've rolled up their sleeves. They thought, sod it, we're going for these people and we're supporting them to become all they can. But it's been a shocker, an absolute shocker. And so we're dedicated to listening to those stories, to bringing them up. And actually, I don't think the political class here really know or prepared for what they have to now put in because of the policies that they've done over the last 2 years.
You know, I like to be an upbeat person, as you know. On The Money, we celebrate business, commerce, prosperity. It's been a tough show today. You know, we've been talking about the cost of living crisis. We've been talking about difficult economic issues that are coming down the track. But let's talk a little bit about that unheralded army of volunteers that we got across the UK. When you're on your travels, tell us about some of the charities that you come across, that you work with. Not the huge charities, which everybody knows, the household names that have got a lot of cash. The charities struggling to get by, doing work at the grassroots.
They're the heroes. They are the heroes, and they will take lives as they see them. They will but be ambitious for them. They'll try to get them in jobs. They'll move them on in the relationships. They'll talk about the things that often the big boys won't. Things about the importance of family structure. They will, in a sense, replace some of that, the loss of fatherhood in certain communities. They will step in these kind of issues. And they do that left, right and centre. Do you know, in terms of the charitable sector, something like 85% of the money in the charity sector goes to 4% of the charities.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, and that's all the big boys.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
and we're not dissing them. I mean, they do good work. Oxfam, Salvation Army. These are incredible British institutions.
Yeah.
But it's the small guys, in your view, who really get down where the problems are.
They get down where the problems are. They tell us. They make you brave to argue the key things. Do you know what's fascinating about today? It has been a depressing day. The cost of living. It's nothing that we haven't known coming down the track. There's equally been something important launched today by the Children's Commissioner, brilliant lady, Rachel, who's launched this look.
Rachel D'Souza, right?
Just superb.
Yeah.
She's launched a look at, because the CSJ uncovered that there's 100,000 kids who've gone missing from school.
Yeah, they haven't turned up at school.
That's Wembley
Stadium.
Stadium.
Since the pandemic. Unbelievable,
100,000, right? It's two Ellen Roads if you're from my neck of the woods, right? They've gone missing. We don't know where they are.
Yeah.
700 schools now have a class or so missing at any one stage. That's missing. This is if we want to kind of future-proof ourselves from this kind of inflationary shock and all the rest in going forward, things like financial education and all this, how are we going to do that if these kids aren't in? And it's those kind of things that the charities are telling us. Get the bloody government to look at this stuff, because that's important. Pardon my French.
Andy Cook for the CSJ. With your help here on The Money, we will continue to bang that drum and across GB News, of course, because if it matters to you, it matters to us. That's all we've got time for today. Join us here on The Money at the same time tomorrow. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. And on TV and on radio, that was On The Money.
Hello again. Bright, sunny skies are arriving across the UK once early cloud has cleared, but they are accompanied by a cold wind coming all the way from the Arctic and carrying some wintry showers, but only in a few places. For many, once this cold front is through, high pressure is building back in, so it's staying relatively settled. However, you can see the tight isobars there, especially across northern and eastern parts of the UK. A cold wind returns directly from the north, and that wind will blow some wintry showers, a mixture of rain, sleet, hail and snow for parts of northern Scotland. Meanwhile, cloud and outbreaks of generally showery rain clearing the south by early afternoon, and then those brighter skies for all of us. 10, 11 Celsius in the south, 6 or 7 further north, but feeling cold when you take into account that strong wind coming from the north. It will continue to blow clear skies our way across much of the country through Wednesday night into the early hours of Thursday. A few showers coming down the North Sea into northern Scotland as well as eastern England. Again, a mixture of rain, sleet and snow. But we'll get some clear spells away from those showers. Temperatures fairly widely below freezing. So a frosty, cold start to Thursday. Plenty of bright, sunny weather first thing. Not much fog around compared to recent mornings. But it is going to be a cold day, particularly in the north and the east when you take into account that wind, gales around the far north at first. And that wind will also blow in further snow showers for the far north of Scotland and perhaps the odd snow flurry for eastern counties. Otherwise, plenty of sunny weather. And under those clear skies again on Thursday night, widely a frost will form. In fact, it could be a very cold night indeed across some southern and southwestern parts of the UK, perhaps in some spots the coldest night of the winter so far. But cloudier skies return from the west on Friday, and that cloud will keep frost a bit more limited through the weekend.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints over a drink.